Okay, so good morning, everybody. This is going to be an interesting discussion. Nerman, thank you for your input on Facebook, your thoughts and ideas. It's always nice to know what the mentee is thinking. Chris and I tend to presume that a lot of people are at certain levels of knowledge and awareness and interest, but we don't know that for sure. So we're sort of basing it on what we think you think. Sometimes we're, good, and sometimes we're way off. So I do appreciate your inputs in reference to Kali Linux. Can you tell me what your understanding of Kali Linux is?
I'm sorry, can you repeat your question?
Sure. What do you know about Kali Linux?
Well, I recently started using the Kali Linux, actually a virtual machine, so I installed VirtualBox and I installed my Kali Linux, and now I'm trying to use all those tools like Nmap, and I also installed I think it's called, it's also virtual machine. I kind of created my virtual lab for practicing for using those hacking tools, and the other one is I think it's called Metasploitable. So it's actually virtual machine that you can attack. So instead, doing that on my own network system, I mean I know a little bit, so I'm still exploring, learning by myself. I'm watching those videos on YouTube. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I started using those things and kind of doing some practice. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. And by the way, good morning, Abrar. I think Abrar is joining us from New York. I think. Is that correct, sir? He's just on the phone from the looks of it. There you are. You're not muted now, Abrar. Oh well. Anyway, there's one of the folks in OCIO is up in New York, and he indicated an interest, and I thought his name was Abrar. So anyway, you sparked a great thought and discussion, Nerman. So we're going to try and get into it a little bit. The big challenge I think that we have here is you arrive with a fair amount of information and knowledge already. And there are others that are just saying, what is this cybersecurity thing? What can it do for me? Am I interested in doing this as a career, and those sorts of things? So I've got a wide range of skill sets that we need to speak to here, and there are some important things to know before you download Kali Linux, for example. Many people here may not know about things like ports and protocols, may not know about firewalls, may not know about VirtualBox or other virtual environments, and may not know about sandboxes, honeypots, those sorts of things. Ways in which things like this can be more managed and more actively controlled. I do remember, in fact, I got in trouble one time a number of years ago because I heard about a tool that was out there on the black web, and from my regular network, I took a sacrificial laptop. In other words, a laptop that I knew I was going to be doing a low-level format on, and I connected to this site, and I downloaded the tool that they had, and then I disconnected and put it on a thumb drive, and then everything else that we did was offline, and every time we installed it on a system, we would wipe that system before we would reuse it. In other words, it gave us an opportunity to look at the tool. But imagine somebody who doesn't know how to do that virtual machine that you're talking about, downloading Kali and clicking on it, and it says, oh, look, here's John the Ripper. Oh, cool, let's do this at CNN.com or something like that. And the next thing you know, there's flashing blue lights out in front of their house. So we need to be careful as we're discussing this, because Kali has a reputation in the industry. It's extremely powerful. It is something that obviously practitioners should know about and should be conversant with, but it is also one of the top 3 tools of choice for black hats. In other words, you can use this tool for good, or you can use this tool for evil. And the challenge is not everybody knows where you're coming from when you're using it. Okay, so Kali Linux, again, you were mentioning this in the forum in Facebook. Kali Linux is incredibly powerful, and it's got a whole stack of tools. Nmap was the one you just mentioned. Nmap is a very good tool for mapping out your network topology, and so that you can actually get a representation of what your network is and how it looks, which is great. There's nothing sinister about Nmap. But again, like I said, if I recall rightly, things like John the Ripper are on there, and John the Ripper is an offensive tool designed for brute force attacks against a particular network. And there's no way around it. John the Ripper, my organization, for example, uses John the Ripper, but only when they are doing penetration testing. And by the way, they use it on their networks. In other words, they know that they're doing it. Their CISO and the ISSO all have said, yes, this is what we're going to do. This is the boundaries that we're going to do it in. And they set up John the Ripper to go only within those boundaries. And then they tell everybody we're about to do testing. So, don't be surprised if something occurs. Call the help desk if it does. And then they do the testing typically on a weekend. In other words, when there's no one else on the network or very few people. So it's a managed capability, but for the first-time Kali user, they look at that as being like a candy store. And the last thing I want is for someone in this group to unintentionally fire up a tool and get in trouble. Didn't even know what they were doing. So I figured the first thing that we're going to talk about today is how to segregate your network. And I have an example up here on the screen of Sandboxes. Can you tell me your understanding of Sandboxes? I know based on what you just described, you know about Sandboxes, you know what they do. Can you tell me your thoughts on that, your understanding?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
Yeah, I never used Sandbox. Actually, I tried to use on my Windows 11 Pro, but I mean, I just tried, but I didn't really understood how to use it. I tried to activate and set up, but it's my understanding it's the same thing, like similar like virtual machine, if I'm not wrong. But to be honest, I don't have that much knowledge about Sandbox.
Okay. Well, Sandbox is another way of describing an environment that is, if you want to think about it, it's designed to be an entire operating environment within a controlled space, like a virtual machine. Most of the time, I mean, a lot of people don't understand a virtual machine, so let's start with that. The virtual machine is a virtual representation of a physical computer. All right? It it looks like a computer, it acts like a computer, but you can't go to Walmart and buy one. You know, a virtual machine is software that mimics an entire hardware and operating system. It has ports, it has drivers, it has place to install software. You can have different levels of access on it. You can install an entire OS onto it, and the sandbox being within a virtual machine, as soon as you turn it off, doesn't exist anymore. Okay, that's the virtual machine. The sandbox is the environment that's built within the virtual machine. Okay, so I remember here for my organization, we had a big issue a number of years ago when we were doing VPNs. We're setting up, you know, VPNs for all the customers, and the customers in their minds, they said, okay, I'm connecting to this organization, and they did not understand that that entire VPN meant that they were now part of this segregated environment, and they used to call the help desk and get really, really upset when they could no longer print to their printer right next to them. It's like, look, you know, when I'm not connected to the VPN, I can print. When I'm connected to the VPN, I can't print. How come? And we had to explain to them that that was actually taking those bytes off of the VPN. And the VPN has boundaries. And, you know, they didn't understand that, and therefore they used to get pretty perturbed at us because, hey, I can't print. I can print when I'm not on the network, but I can't print while I'm sorry, I can print when I'm off the network, but when I'm in my VPN, I click on print, and it wants to print to my printer at my office, and I want it to print here at my house. So virtualization means it's acting as if it's another computer, okay? And a sandbox is a virtual environment that is designed to be segregated. There are two main types of segregation. Chris, do you remember these? Segregation? Separation?
There's the networking escapes me. It's been a while.
That's fine. I threw that on you, sorry. In segregating, you have two ways to do it. One is called physical segregation, and that is also known as what's called sneaker net. And you have a particular system that is totally isolated hardware and electrically from anything else. That's called physical segregation. In order to get a bit or a byte to that system or off that system, you have to have something, usually like a thumb drive. You plug it in, you get the data, you take it over here, or you take this stuff, plug it in here, and copy it. That's physical segregation. The other one is called logical segregation. And sandboxes excel at that logical segregation. So if you think about it, Nerman, you may be able to tell me this. When you do your virtual box, are you then allowed to use your thumb drive USB ports?
I never tried. Do you mean like when I plug in my USB? No, I'm not.
Right.
Yeah, no, I'm. Yeah, but what I do, like, as I mentioned, I have two like virtual machines, like one with the Kali, one that I already mentioned. It's using like for the practice for attacking. All of them, they're like offline.
Okay.
So yeah, so I'm not connected to. So whatever I do offline. Okay. And I just told them that on YouTube. They said it's really risky if you're online, so someone can breach in your system and use the I think it's called Metasploit.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do offline everything.
Okay. Smart. Here's something to think about, and that's why Kali has great positive potential, but it also has great negative potential. Let's say you have let's say a Verizon Fios account, and that's where you get your internet from. Internet providers, in other words, people who are out there providing services, be that Cox, Verizon, what's the cloud one, the one that Elon Musk is doing. Anyway, any of those internet providers, when they provide you that service, they also, a lot of people don't recognize this, but those providers are legally responsible for what you do on that network. In other words, there have been internet providers that have been taken to court because they allowed people to do things within their environment, and all they provided was access to the internet. An internet provider got sued because of the nasty things people were doing on their network, because they provided the vehicle for these people to go out and do nasty things to, CNN.com or Navy.mil or whatever. So when you talk about sandboxing, the next thing that we talk about is firewalls. Have you ever heard of a DMZ? You ever heard of a DMZ?
Yes. Yeah, I heard. It's you mean like a demilitarized zone?
Yes.
Yeah,
On the networks.
A little bit about networking, and yeah, like for example, we can place a firewall in demilitarized zone. You mean something like that?
Something like that. Yep.
Okay.
Let me describe a DMZ to you, because DMZs are all over the place, and in fact, you probably have a DMZ in your house. But let's talk about this. A DMZ, first of all, remember that your upstream internet provider has their own capabilities, their own filtering, their own monitoring that they're not going to tell you about unless you violate it. Okay? So, number one, your upstream provider is watching your bytes and bits. Number two, a DMZ is where the internet comes to a particular point. It's like a boundary, and then you have a firewall at that particular point that will only allow certain ports and protocols to certain hosts within this space. Okay? So number one, you have a firewall at the external edge of your DMZ. Then you have what are called hardened or bastion hosts within that DMZ. And those are web servers, typically. They provide web access, but they don't provide, for example, database access. Why? Because database servers are extremely frequent targets of hackers. Because I think Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the top hacking techniques involves what's called buffer overflow. And buffers have to be applied, buffer criteria have to be applied for every single field, in every single table, in every single database on your database server. Okay, just one field in one table in one database can compromise the whole server. So most of the time, people do not put database servers out on the DMZ because that is an area that is considered to be capable of being exploited by external entities. Then you have this DMZ. At the outside edge, like I said, is a DMZ, and only certain hardened hosts are in the DMZ. Then at the inside edge, this is what a lot of people don't recognize. At the inside edge, where you go from the DMZ to your corporate network, there is another firewall. And that firewall only allows specific traffic, again, from a DMZ site to sites within the network. And the point of a DMZ is to offer two places where you funnel and restrict traffic. Okay, so DMZ has a firewall at the outside and a firewall at the inside, and then within that DMZ space they have only hardened hosts. You don't put a laptop in a DMZ. A laptop would be compromised within minutes because laptops do not have the same strength as servers. Okay, so that's why it's important to understand, and tell me your understanding of this as well, Nerman, what you know about ports and protocols. A firewall, I'll just go through this. Firewall, well, let's say TCP and UDP traffic use what are called ports and protocols. Nearly everything on the internet is either TCP or UDP, data packets. Transmission Control Protocol is TCP, TCP/IP, and then UDP is Universal Datagram Protocols. TCP has certain things, UDP has certain things missing that make them good for certain capabilities. But there are also what are called ports. This data packet goes only to and traverses switches and routers and firewalls and DMZs only through what are called certain ports. Do you guys remember, Chris, you know this, but Nerman, Abrar, do you remember what port is web traffic, HTTP traffic?
Is it port 80?
Yes, it is. And how about HTTPS?
So HTTPS, it's a secure.
Encrypted, right?
Encrypted, yeah.
I'll give you a hint. It's in the hundreds.
Mm-hmm.
Can you say again?
I'll give you a hint. It's in the hundreds.
Is it if I'm not wrong, 439 or?
Oh man, you are so close. You are so close. It's 443.
443. Yeah, I wanted to say 443. Yeah, 443. Yeah.
Yep. So 443
yeah.
is for HTTPS traffic. What that means is, for example, if you're in a web browser and it just does HTTP, it traverses port 80 unencrypted. If that same server has the capability and your browser, your client browser, has that same capability to use HTTPS, it will not traverse port 80. Same information, same server, going to the same client goes to a different port. And that port, HTTPS, all packets have to be encrypted. Okay, so
question. I'm sorry.
Sure. No, go ahead.
For interrupting you. But UDP is not that much secure comparing with TCP, correct?
You're talking about some generalities about UDP. Let me do a little bit of that. The differences between TCP and UDP. TCP involves and includes what's called error checking. All right. In other words, it's bidirectional. In other words, it has to go from me to you, then back to me, then back to you. Because I send, let's say I'm a switch, I send a packet to you. You come back and say, this is what I think this packet looks like. In other words, did it drop any bits or bytes? I'm sorry?
Is that three handshake? How they call three handshake?
It's called a handshake. Yeah, it's a handshake. Error checking is another way of describing it. But every packet that goes also has a confirmation packet that returns that says, did I get this right? And then the sender a second time says, yes, you got it right. And then that packet keeps going. So you think about a packet doing this as it's going down the internet. It's forward, backward, forward, backward, forward, backward, forward, backward. Sent, confirmed, yep, that's right, move on. Sent, confirmed, yep, that's right, move on. And so TCP/IP is, although it has a high accuracy and a low error rate, it is also slower. UDP, if you think about it, UDP is most used in things that involve like streaming protocols, your Netflix, your Amazon Prime Video, those sorts of things. Those typically travel with UDP. And UDP is faster, has a higher capability of moving large amounts of data, but it also ignores some of the errors. So if let's say you're transporting a 10 gigabyte file from one place to another, and you want to make sure that that file arrives 100% intact, you would not transfer that file using UDP, because UDP won't error check each packet that goes. You would send it by TCP, but it would take longer. But it would arrive, it has a better chance of arriving accurately than UDP. Okay, so UDP, it's faster, it's typically used for streaming, and it has it removes some of the error checking that is built into TCP/IP. Okay, so as you're looking at the two things, number one, we have ports. Number two, we have protocols, and the data packets that move are typically either TCP or UDP, and it's possible on a single port you could have both. But it's also possible that only one should be allowed. And that's where a firewall comes in. Firewalls are set to only allow, for example, unencrypted traffic to traverse on port 80. And by the way, port 80 is TCP. So number one, TCP/IP. Number two, unencrypted. Number three, bidirectional. Okay? It all travels on port 80. That's what a firewall does. A firewall says this port is set up to allow this type of traffic. It's either unidirectional from outside to inside or from inside to outside. It's bidirectional both ways. Or it's only allowed on this particular port. So, gosh, I remember there are lots of different ports. And by the way, if you're doing your Security Plus, you will need to study the different ports and protocols. They will be discussed. Typically, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, it's usually in a scenario where they say, this is going on, why do you think the data is not arriving? And you say, well, it's being sent on UDP and the port only allows TCP or something like that. Is that right, Chris?
That is correct. Some of the test items, and I won't go into gory details, but when Scotty says given the scenario, they'll interchange between the numbers and the name of the port. Mm-hmm. And they'll put on the selection, hey, let's say a firewall, disable port number or enable port number. You got to know what those port numbers are and disable. Right. And a lot of those are usually your first set of questions are live scenario questions where they'll give you a network architecture and they'll say, set up a firewall or set up a network architecture to make this network work and what ports and protocols you leave open and closed. They will also have firewall questions. I don't want to go into the more gory details because there's an NDA there. So
right. So, Nerman, is that making a little sense?
Yes. Well, so basically, UDP is used more like it's used more like for like you said, streaming, like for video and voice.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
Correct. And that's why when you're talking to somebody over a virtual like phone number, Google Voice is a good example, but your Microsoft Teams, any of those like webinar, well, this one we're on here, free conference call, it's probably using UDP so that our video, looks pretty clean, but it could have glitches. You remember watching somebody where they're talking away and then all of a sudden their frame freezes. Their frame freezes because of an error. If it was TCP, that error would not have occurred, but the video streaming itself would be slower. So there are trade-offs. You have to decide how you're going to do this, and most of the time, ports and protocols are established by the manufacturer. You don't choose to put up a web server, for example, on port 81. Why? Because upstream, your internet router at your house, and then upstream from that, the internet router at, I don't know, let's say Cox.com, which is what I have, aren't going to let port 81 web traffic to arrive. They're not set up to allow port 81. So everything follows the same port and protocol arrangement, and every switch, every router, every firewall, every border enclave has to be set to allow those packets to travel. And frequently, if they're not set up correctly, it stops. And then you have to start troubleshooting. You say, well, where do my bytes get to? Well, let's see, I get up to my home router, my Wi-Fi router, and it stops. Imagine that. So then you start troubleshooting your Wi-Fi router. So the ports and protocols are important, but I'm gonna stop sharing this sandbox thing. Sorry, I pushed the wrong button. So okay, stop screen sharing. So when you're talking about your sandboxes or your, like you were saying, your virtual host or whatever, those are methods to stop and highly control your ports and protocols that enter and exit your virtual session. A lot of people don't realize this, but your home computer could be hosting services that you don't even know about. And so when you're doing your Nmap and those sorts of things on your local computer, turn it on your own system and see what it shows. For example, I'll give you a really good example, HP printers. Most HP printers will listen, actually more than HP, but they'll listen on port 80. They have their own little web host so that you can connect to them, log into that network printer, and change settings on it. True story, I was with President's Commission in the late 90s, and we were on one floor of a particular building, and the folks that were on the next floor above us had their network printers all hacked. Somebody got into them, and all the printers, they didn't think about it, they were hardening the hosts, but all the printers had the default password. So somebody logged in and set the passwords for all the printers. and they had to remove all the network cards out of the printers and replace them because somebody got into the printers. They were hardening for the computers, not for the printers. And by the way, their network guy, their IT support person that thought he was better than me, got fired. He just wasn't there the next month. So as you're doing this, it's important to understand where these things do go and where these things are supposed to go to make sure that you don't step over any of those boundaries and set off triggers and alarms. So when we talk about sandboxing, we talk about virtual host. Kali Linux is best operated in those virtual environments like you were talking about, because you could unintentionally fire something up that causes your internet provider to close your account without discussion. Say, nope, you're not on the internet anymore. You know?
Yeah, the first time when I started using Nmap, I was scanning my network using my IP address, but I'm using a firewall WatchGuard T15, and actually everything was firewall was working very well, so all ports were closed. The client it says it was alive, but you couldn't see anything. But then I realized, and I learned that too. They said like you have to be careful when you're using those tools. You can make some damage on your devices.
Absolutely.
And I realized that one of my laptops was working like in kind of like weird way, and I stopped doing that. And that's why I created I did a little bit of research, and then I created my virtual lab.
Right.
And as you said, like it can be really dangerous. So.
Right. So I will tell you what went through my head on Facebook when you said, hey, can you teach us about Kali Linux? The first thing that came to my mind was, it's like me handing the keys to the Lamborghini to my son, you know, without him having a driver's license. It's like, oh, I don't know, man. You know, yeah, it's got great potential and great power, but you could end up wrapped around a telephone pole, you know, very quickly. And, you know, it has the capability to get you in trouble.
Oh yeah. I mean, people talking like you can even end up in jail, like if you don't know what
Correct.
you do, even if it's like if whatever, like you do, like intentionally, unintentionally, like you can really get in trouble. So.
Yep. So from Chris and my perspective, in other words, this mentor perspective, it's not that we're discouraging the use of Kali Linux. What we're saying is, if you do it, you've got to do it in a proper fashion so that you don't get yourself in trouble. And so that's why we started off talking sandboxes and VPNs and ports and protocols. If you don't understand that and you download Kali Linux, you're walking around with a loaded gun. And I just don't want that to happen. You know? So we can help, we can encourage, we can point to resources, we can show you, for example, like you did with your virtual host. Maybe one of these days you can show us what you've done with your virtual host.
Yeah, maybe next time.
We can get the others so that they can learn how to do it as well.
Screen, I can connect on my other PC and I can share my screen, and then I can basically show you what I did and how
just so you know, in case you have it, if you have Windows 10 or Windows 11 Pro or Enterprise versions, not home versions, but if you have Windows 10 or Windows 11 Pro or Enterprise, you have the capability to run what's called Windows Sandbox.
Oh yeah, I did. I used that one. I was first time I used Windows. I have Windows 11 Pro on all my devices.
Okay.
And the first time I was using a Windows virtual machine, and I installed Ubuntu. but it's not like Kali, like it doesn't have all those tools, and I couldn't do that much in Ubuntu. And then I started using VirtualBox.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, VirtualBox is the way to go. It is a semi-safe environment, and again, like everything else, it can be misconfigured. So you've got to make sure. I'll just give an example. If you load all the defaults, then you get what those defaults are set to. And many people don't understand what those defaults mean. So start with, what does this do for me? How is it configured? What's allowed and what's blocked? Because otherwise, again, the folks that are out there, let me point this out. Do you know Kali Linux is known as what's called open source software?
Yeah.
All of the tools on it are also open source tools. What does that mean to you, open source?
It means like you can modify, you can do some modification inside the program, like so to change the code. Of course, you have to pay for the license, and you do only on your copy. That's how I understand.
Okay. Open source, yeah, you're partially correct. Open source means that the source code is available. But in addition, open source is provided without cost. All right? Open source literally means I turn my code over to the public. Now, that sounds really good, being a member of the public, saying, oh yeah, sure, I want this stuff for free. But Kali Linux is a pretty powerful group of tools. So do they make zero money in Kali? And it's a rhetorical question, but it's one you need to ask yourself. Would you spend all your time putting together a open source distribution and give it out to a bunch of people and host it on web hosts and stuff, and you pay for all of that, and then give it away for free and say, no,
I will not do it.
Right. So how do the folks that put together Kali Linux make their money?
I don't know, but it's good.
Okay. It's a basic question you sort of have to understand. Kali Linux, the folks that produce Kali Linux make their money by training, by publishing training. In other words, you can learn a lot about Kali Linux at a price from the people who designed Kali Linux. Or you can download it and fire it up and set it against Macy's.com, and next thing you know, people are going to be knocking on your front door with flashlights. That's the problem with Kali. The people that can teach you how to use it well will charge you to do so. They will allow you to get this tool, but in order to use it properly, they'll charge you money to do it. So in the long run, they will make money. It's the same thing with Red Hat. Red Hat Linux started off being free. You could download Red Hat and install it for no charge. But in order to make it work right, the folks at Red Hat established a training program. And that's how you would get, better at Red Hat.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the long run, when somebody says open source, that's a two-edged sword. One is, yeah, it could be something that you can get a hold of and you're not breaking the law by using it. But two, you may have to teach yourself. You may have to go out and find people who are sharing about this, people, forums where they talk about how to use this tool within Kali Linux or whatever. You may have to research each tool individually. Yes, Chris?
There's also meetups and user groups that are specific to certain Linuxes and certain distributions of Linuxes. From my experience of Linux, you could download Ubuntu, and Ubuntu is just a certain distribution of Linux.
Yep.
And once you begin to realize, you look at one Linux distro and look at the other Linux distro, they're pretty much the same operating system with some small tweaks or small added applications to it.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go back to my reskilling academy that I've done 3 years ago to get me into the IT role. We didn't just use Kali Linux. We also used what was called Debian, Security Onion, which is what they call a flavor of Debian, and another just general Ubuntu Linux. And the general Ubuntu Linux was like, hey, here's the essentials of how you use Linux. But when we grew ourselves up to Security Onion, which I believe is a more defensive version of Linux, you're pretty much in a guided curriculum of learning what you need to do. If you're looking for free and cheap, Ubuntu is a good start in the training. And that's what the Linux Plus will try to say, to tell you to do, and that's what LPIC will try to get you to do is, hey, use Ubuntu, it's free. You're just doing file system administration stuff. But as you grow older and you get into a more experienced role, you'll get the organizations to come pay for you to go learn Red Hat, Kali for offensive security or whatever. That would be my guidance in the end.
Yeah, very good. Speaking about our particular environment that we do with the government, they have typically 3 main Linux distributions out there. One is called SunOS, and it's very, very small group of servers that use that. Another is Solaris, which is also based on Unix, and then Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And Red Hat has established itself as being the premier enterprise Linux distributions. So if somebody was going to move upward and try and prepare themselves for a Linux administrator position, Red Hat is the way to go. But Red Hat does not use Debian. So you got to understand the Debian kernel, which is you mentioned Debian, Chris, but Debian is also the source for Kali. Kali runs off Debian. And, you know, a lot of people may not understand. I'm going to go all the way back to the very beginning. Linux. Linux came from Unix. Unix was and still is a proprietary operating system. At the time, it was owned by AT&T, and there was a guy that worked many, many years ago for AT&T. His name was Linus Torvald, and he recognized that Unix was a series of modules, hundreds of modules that had particular inputs and particular outputs and particular switches within them. If you think about it, it's like a bunch of transistors making up a radio. Well, there were a bunch of little modules that made up an operating system. And Linus Torvald copied, he said, I've got this particular module. Let's say it's get. And I'm going to write something called get. And it's going to do the exact same thing as this Unix version of get. This is proprietary. So you can't use this, but you know what the inputs are and you know what the outputs are. So he programmed Linux, which is short for, you know, Linus Torvald, Linux, because he studied every single module within the proprietary Unix operating system and duplicated them for free in Linux. So that's how Linux began. It is a ripoff of Unix by staring at what Unix does and then repeating it over here in open source. So when we talk about the various Linux distributions like Ubuntu, like Debian, like Kali, they all have their same start with Linus Torvald, and they're just sort of like, they sort of head in a particular direction so that they can be used by certain groups. Ubuntu, I think the main draw to Ubuntu, number one, is that it stays free, but they also have routine upgrades. Ubuntu stays current with their upgrade cycle, whereas many of these other distributions may not. Mint, for example, may or may not. Just think about it that way. Also, Ubuntu has a pretty good user interface, graphical user interface. So the good thing about Linux of any type is it's typically free. The bad thing is it typically arrives without training. And somebody who knows more than you can get into your Linux and compromise it, and you may not even know it has occurred. You know? So just something to think about when we're talking Linux overall. It's good to learn. Absolutely. We've got roughly about the same number of Windows servers as we do Linux servers. So there are, there's room for Windows servers and there's room for Linux servers in an enterprise. And by the way, most of the Windows folks don't know Linux, and most of the Linux folks don't know Windows, and they don't care. They're specialists in their particular OS. So if you can learn them both, Windows Server and Linux, you would be ahead of the crowd. You would be ahead of the crowd.
Yeah. I'm really interested in penetration testing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I'm trying to learn all those tools.
Understood. What I recommend you do is, isn't there a CompTIA Pentest Plus or something certification now?
Yes, there is. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Nerman, do you have any certifications that you're working on?
Not really, no.
Okay.
But I'm using all those books that you just mentioned because we use them in my school, like I'm in class for our classes,
right?
Networking and other classes. But I just sign up for some courses, online courses.
Okay.
And they have those certification. They prepare you for those certification.
Gotcha.
Different kinds of certifications.
Okay, Chris.
Nervin, I got a question for you. When you go job hunting for a pen tester role, what are you looking for?
Well, I know it's so hard to get in that field without experience. So that's why I'm trying to learn something ahead, kind of get some experience. And
can I challenge?
I would be happy if I worked for some company, but I also heard people say you can start doing by yourself, maybe make website.
Can I challenge you?
Yeah.
I think you have more experience than you think you do. Not professionally, but I bet you've done something in school that does a lot of pen testing. I would speak about your home lab that you're doing related to pen testing, what that's about. I would start looking at junior security analyst positions or SOC analyst positions to start.
Well, that's a good idea, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Or look at system administration to learn Linux a lot more, especially if you have a keen interest in Linux. A lot of the penetration testing tools work with Linux. One of the links I shared a week ago was called cyberseek.org, and I believe one of the circles said penetration tester.
Yeah.
You can trace that back to a beta role and see, and that will be your start.
I did.
Yeah.
I already did.
Okay, cool, perfect. Yeah. Okay.
You posted it. I saved the link and I checked actually. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Very good.
So my suggestion would be figure out what skills you need to be a good penetration tester. That will save you time, heartache, money, whatsoever, and you can apply from there. I'm not going to say, hey, drop out of school, get your degree, because that's going to give you a heads up on a lot of candidates. But at the same time, see what the employers want for a penetration tester and put your plan in to shift on that role. That would be my suggestion to you, sir.
Yeah.
You might also, those are great suggestions, Chris, great suggestions. As you are lining yourself up for an application, Nerman, you might also recognize that this cybersecurity mentorship plays a part in your experience. We may just talk about things, but that doesn't mean that we don't have value. So you could, for example, say that you are in a cybersecurity mentorship program where you are learning about, we have a number of various focuses here. We don't teach. We're not training people. But what I am trying to do is give you that mindset that keeps you on the right side of the table when you're going for a job. Because imagine yourself as a ISSO, and somebody walks in off the street and says, "Oh yeah, I'm really good at working Kali Linux." Well, that may not be understood as an asset. That person may be a liability if they don't have the right mindset, because they're basically saying, yeah, I know how to bring down a network. Hire me. Oh, yeah, right. Give you a user ID and a password on my network. So be aware that there is not only the techniques and the tools that you need to know, but also the mindset that you need to know. If you look on our Facebook page, did you know that we have a code of ethics?
Yes.
Okay, and that code of ethics is strongly based on the code of ethics for the group that handles the CISSP. That's where I started. It's based on the CISSP code of ethics. So anybody that is a member of this group needs to agree to follow that code of ethics. So you can say, I'm in a cybersecurity mentorship, and they have a code of ethics that states that we're not going to do anything illegal, immoral, or unethical, that we will seek to preserve the integrity of our organizations where we work, those sorts of things. That points out that you aren't just this loose cannon that, I've got lots of skills, so give me a job, because those skills can be used against an organization. A lot of people don't understand this, but one of the biggest sources of enterprise security risk is what's called the trusted insider. Somebody that got hired to come into the network, but then they had a nasty intent, or, somebody said, we're demoting you, or we're moving you over here where you don't want to go, or whatever, and they get upset, and they have the keys to the enterprise. Yeah. So, you've got to not only show people that you have the right technical skills, but you've got to show them that you've got the mindset that you need to be an asset and a positive force within their environment.
Yeah, that's why I'm here with you guys. And to be honest, I've really learned a lot from you guys. This is my third week, and you said it's not teaching, but actually I'm learning. Like I heard like a lot useful things in those 3 weeks, 3 sessions, and. Yeah, and as my professor, Dr. Perry, mentioned that, he said, like, you joined this group, and just follow them. You can learn a lot from them, and it's true.
Yeah.
So I'm really learning a lot. So
Good. Good. So we started with Kali Linux. Let's back down from there. We started with Kali Linux, which is a penetration testing tool. It is beyond what we are comfortable showing people how to use because some people can use it improperly, not knowing. And, you know, as they're going to jail with handcuffs, they say, but Scotty and Chris said it was okay. You know, I don't want to be in that place. So from pen testing tools, we get down to the proper environment in which to use them, and that's the sandboxes, or like you were saying, your virtual host. In order to properly use a virtual host, you have to understand that it has boundaries that only allow certain things. That is the definition of a firewall. And within a firewall, you need to learn about ports and protocols. Ports and protocols are foundational to any security certification or network certification or server certification. You will not go wrong if you are looking towards getting a Network Plus certification from CompTIA, for example, because that will play into how do I do VPNs, how do I do virtual hosts, how do I use Kali Linux and other pen testing tools. They all start with the foundation of how these packets go back and forth across the internet.
yeah, actually, I just started this week the class, and actually my book is. I'm just checking my book. It says CompTIA Network Plus Guide to Network.
Very good.
Yeah, so we just started that class. So
yeah, that's the right place to start. So, you know, in other words, I'm not going to give you the keys to the Lamborghini, but I am going to, you know, remind you that driver's ed is important. We'll get to the Lamborghini at some point, and I really do appreciate your ambition about doing this. I like the fact that you already understand that it needs to be in a virtual environment. That makes me feel comfortable.
Yeah,
because
yeah, I did
that
a
means
lot of research. Like, so as you said, like you can get in trouble, and I didn't. Of course, nobody wants to get in trouble, so I did a lot of research, and I mean, you can find on YouTube many useful videos regarding that. And yeah, I as I said, I just created like my virtual offline lab, and so now I'm kind of safe. Whatever I do on my computer, my virtual machine, and it's offline. So, yeah, I guess I'm
very
on
good.
the right track.
You're on the right track. Yep. Very much so. So, hey, we're out of time today. I hope you got some from us. Chris and I love passing on sage information. I've been doing this for 32 years now. And there's so much to learn. Like Chris started with the very important thing. The very important question is, what do I want to do with this? And most of the time, you're going to fall into what you like doing, and that will help you expand. You may think that Kali Linux is your answer, but it may just be a vehicle to where you want to go. You may want to end up getting your certified ethical hacker credentials along with your penetration testing. That way you can arrive and say, I can help make sure that this network is secure. You know? Yes, Chris?
I have an idea for a topic. I like to simulate a job hunt. How to hunt for a job.
Yeah, also one thing, I think that's great, Chris. I think one other thing that we could do is simulate the interview. You know, why should I hire you? Those are excellent questions that you need to know how to answer. Yeah, we could do some simulated interviews so that you can, you know, mentees can become more comfortable talking about themselves.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
I'll put that down in the Facebook group, our ideas,
Okay.
so that we
Great.
can keep that there.
Okay. Well, that's all I got for this week, guys. I really appreciate you guys coming online. Abrar, I think you are who you think you are up in New York. Good to have you on here, and I hope you learned a little bit as well. And we will talk next week or on the Facebook page. Please, if you like this, you've heard it said before, subscribe and share. The bigger we get, the more variety we come to with these webinars. All right?
Thank you.
Everybody. Have a great Saturday.
See you next